What would you say are the main issues that modern men are facing today?
Well, certainly one of them is what I call the phenomenon of the 21st century distracted man, right? Which is the technology is just taking over everything to a large extent. And of course, the centerpiece of that technology is the modern cell phone, which, as a friend of mine said not long ago, they do everything for you but serve you coffee nowadays, these phones, right? And so people are spending inordinate amount of times on their phones. Uh, I hear from some of the women I know or know in terms of what goes on in their world, how they rarely go more than 3 or 4 hours without checking their phone, even when they're sleeping. Many of them sleep with their phones. Many men sleep with their phones. Um, so the challenges of modern men are all related to technology to a large degree. You think of it when you have these devices that you get so much quick information from so easily. It's not always conducive to direct communication. And in our own groups, in our men's communities, some of the challenges that guys regularly deal with is the ability or inability to communicate in a direct, straight fashion with another man, right? To call him out when he's talking too much or talking pointlessly or what have you, or if he's not copying to something, right, or not being truthful about something or not claiming something or whatever it is. So the issue of direct communication, which brings us to the three virtues of the samurai, right? Courage, loyalty, and aesthetics. And the first one, courage or forward gear only, directness and straightness of communication, is something that's so important for modern men because of the ability through technology to communicate indirectly or to rely solely on pixels on a screen, right? So that's certainly one. The other one is the cultivation of grit. It's sometimes said what's lacking in millennial generation in particular is the element of grit. And again, because of the powers of technology and certainly the internet, every second young person I meet nowadays either is an entrepreneur or wants to be an entrepreneur because of the freedom it gives them, which is all desirable and what have you. I understand that. But in the face of all that, especially for a person who seeks to be a self-employed or an entrepreneur using technology to create the freedom for themselves, what they need is the grit to deal with adversity or failure when it comes, right? As opposed to, just dragging your cursor here and there, as a way to get out of something, right? Or click and drag, as we say. You imagine sitting having coffee with somebody you don't like their conversation. Can you just click and drag them out of your reality, right? We can actually start thinking that way when we're living with that kind of technology all the time. So the cultivation of grit, directness of communication for men, watching out for sense of entitlement, the prince mentality, which is things should be given to me, mother should do it for me, or a father should come and rescue me and resenting him when he doesn't, right? Anything related to inability to be accountable or responsible for one's life is problematic. And the 21st century distracted man is the man who has access to so much information. He's being invited to 3 events every day on Facebook. He doesn't have to make so many direct personal efforts to get that information because it comes to him very quickly. And he's got to get back online to check this or check that. There's so many ways in which a man can be distracted right now and lose that fire and grit that has always been an aspect of the masculine core and a healthy masculine core. What does it mean to really be focused on one's passion? I sometimes liken the story of Einstein's list, how it speaks to this whole issue. Einstein had two main love relationships in his life, and the first one is often not so well known about. He was married to a Serbian physicist when he was younger, and they had 2 boys, and the relationship was a disaster. I mean, their egos clashed, and it was just going very poorly. And he wrote up a list saying these are the demands that I have in order to stay in a relationship with you, sort of non-negotiable stuff. And she eventually rejected the list because it was too controlling, and it was too controlling. But So they separated because the relationship wasn't working anyway. And then he found he was with another woman who was more comfortable with him being a rock star, and that was his cousin, Elsa Lowenthal, that he spent the rest of his life with. The point of all this is that the list that he drew up was a demonstration of his backbone. They both knew the relationship was dead, but they were trying to keep it together for the sake of their two sons. But he knew that his work was more important, and so he had the grit and the sense of self and the belief in himself and the backbone to say that I'm prioritizing my work here, and I can't continually put energy into a relationship that is just not working. And so again, that single-mindedness of focus, or Immanuel Kant, I talk about him a lot, the 18th century philosopher who was so renowned for his discipline that every day his neighbors used to set their watch on the basis of his daily walk, because he always walked at exactly 3 p.m. every day. He went for his little walk up and down the trail. And he wrote Critique of Pure Reason, which is one of the most dense philosophical treatises ever written in 1781, one of the most extraordinary works ever written. And he could only write that book because he had that extraordinary discipline and focus of mind, where he did not allow himself to be distracted by external causes. So that's one of the challenges I see with modern men, is this tendency to be distracted and have their consciousness and their mind and their energy just spread all over the place, and having too many things on the go, so never accomplishing anything. One of the qualities of the king, the transition from prince to knight to king, the king represents mastery. So king energy is embodied in a man who completes projects, accomplishes things, right? He finishes what he starts. He's not a jack of all trades, who's starting things and never finishing anything. Chogyam Trungpa spoke to that, to the radical Tibetan master, when he said, better not start on the spiritual path, but if you start, you better finish. Meaning that we want to guard against the tendency to dip our toe into so many things but never progress with them. Right? So the undeveloped prince is the one who is sampling a bunch of things but never goes anywhere with it. Whereas the king, the knight, or the king, to the developed masculine archetype, has a sense of accomplishment about him because he finishes his projects. They may not be perfect. We're not talking about perfection, right? Completion and perfection are two different things. Completion is finishing the journey, doing your very best. The Buddha described it as impeccability. When he said on his deathbed, he said, his students were sitting around him, what are your last words? And he said, work out your salvation with diligence and be a light unto yourself. In other words, do your best. Be impeccable. So impeccability is not the same thing as perfection. Perfection is a different thing. Perfectionism is more the fear of being criticized or what have you. But what we're talking about is completion. You start a project, finish it, see it to its end.